we know that you gave him the same joy that and he said, Mr. Davy, I hope you get rains, cats, and dogs.
Because in our economy every year.
Calling himself an inexperienced senator in the majority Senate, Senator Denton returned home to Alabama to touch bases with his constituents and talk briefly with them on the issues facing Alabama. He told his Republican supporters of the various subcommittees he's on, such as the Aging Family and Human Services Subcommittee, which the senator says some of its programs face possible cuts under President Reagan's proposed budget action plan. Then Senator Denton cut the ribbon to his Montgomery office and welcomed local visitors, including former Governor George Wallace. Inside his new office, Senator Denton talked about President Reagan's proposed budget cuts. He says the sentiment among his fellow congressmen is one of support, although he didn't say what chance Reagan's plan has of passing.
He said he'd be satisfied with 97%. So would I, but I think we have just two choices, tighten our belts or our pants fall off.
Denton called President Reagan courageous in sticking with his campaign platform to slice federal spending, and he says the American people should support Reagan's plan. Senator Denton was asked about the jelly beans on his desk.
No, he didn't give them to us, but they are symbolic of his fondness for them. I don't think they're good for your teeth.
Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. The weight and motion scale allows highway officials to weigh trucks without pulling them off the road. The scale consists of plates embedded in the road, which, with the help of a computer, weigh the truck as it passes over the scales. If the truck's too heavy, then it's stopped by enforcement personnel. The new system saves more time than the former method when trucks had to stop to be weighed. The system also has an element of surprise, since the trucker will not know where the mobile trailer housing the weight and motion computer will be. Right now, the State Highway Department has planned 11 sites for the scale. The sites scattered throughout the state in areas where there's high volume of truck traffic, especially where the roads are frequented by coal and other trucks likely to carry overweight cargo. Some of these locations are US 231 between Montgomery and Troy, US 80 in Selma, and Interstate 59 near the Tuscaloosa-Jefferson County line. Alabama is one of only several states which use the weight and motion scale, and the Highway Department says it's pleased with the system because it economically weighs a high volume of trucks. Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News. Today's group was an extremely large number to be recruited during peacetime, according to Air Guard officials. The new airmen are required to work one weekend a month and train for 15 days during the summer once they've completed their basic training.
Now, these new people coming in, some of the people will begin making our training weekends that are already trained for a job. These new airmen that have not been trained for a job will be going to basic military training for 6 weeks, and from there on to an Air Force technical school to train in an Air Force specialty. And when they complete that training, we'll come back to the unit here and begin making their training with the unit here.
Once the airmen and women have completed basic training, they'll find a wide range of jobs available.
As a matter of fact, anywhere from cooks to administrative specialists, aircraft mechanics, avionics technicians, photo processing technicians, information, supply, motor vehicle mechanics, drivers, you name it. We have a pretty good supply of Air Force specialties.
Joined the Air Guard because I had prior service in the Air Force, and I want to continue on serving my country the best that I can.
Although a high school degree is the minimal requirement to join the Air National Guard, some of today's new recruits are college students, and some have prior involvement in the military. Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News.
Tonight, the finance director talks about higher education. I ask him first if he sees waste in higher education spending in Alabama.
Waste is not exactly the word. There is some waste. The biggest bureaucracy in all of state government is education at all levels. The biggest oversized bureaucracies. But the waste that you might be referring to is the complaint I have about our having so many colleges and those colleges providing so many programs. We have 137 PhD doctoral offerings in our universities and colleges in the state. Yet last year we only produced approximately 2 graduates per program. Good example is we have 4 PhD programs in physics. 4. Last year, collectively, they turned out 11 PhD graduates in physics. You don't have to know much about education or costing or anything to know that if we were to consolidate all 4 of those programs at one of our universities, that first of all, it would have every opportunity to be a higher quality program. And secondly, it would cost less per student by a good margin. So if I had my way, I would take away at least 2 of those 4.
Do a lot of consolidation.
Yes, and you go on and on. We have 5 or 6 schools teaching engineering. I remind you that Georgia, in its public institutions, only has 1, Georgia Tech. And this all of our eggs in one basket approach has given them a top nationally ranked engineering school.
You said recently that you've taken out the white flag on higher education. Does that mean that you see a lot of waste in higher education in Alabama that's not going to stop?
Well, I said once at a press conference something rather flippant that had to do with higher education and my long interest in trying to consolidate it and to prevent it from being so duplicative in its programs, and that I was beginning to wonder if anything could really be done. I said I have my white flag out. I haven't waved it yet, but I at least have taken it out.
Put it in perspective, we discuss it and sharpen the skills, none whatsoever. We've got to
bear in mind that if you don't go forward, if you don't become involved, then you will leave a prosecutor, no matter, and a judge, no matter how much they care about the needs of the victims, no matter how much they want facilities, if you don't take it on your own shoulders, and if you don't do it, you leave them with one alternative to family violence. That's to warehouse the perpetrator. And there's got to be a better alternative. We've already come up with, made tremendous strides in identifying the problem and identifying the perpetrators. The reporting systems are getting better and better. Sometimes I feel like that we don't have more child abuse than we used to have. We just have better reporting systems because it's working so well.
the way that I can be of any service to you, I would claim that neglect is brought in manageable terms, if there is such a thing as manageable.
The isolation of the abusing parent,
it is a controversial matter that the Senate will look very carefully at. I think if the Senate passes the unearmarking, the House would pass it, and I'm convinced that the public would vote on it. Would approve it if given the right to vote on it. And so it's simply a battle that has to be won in the Senate, and I'm willing to undertake it, and I'm not worried about the political consequences.
The two inmates, Neal and Renfro, charge in their suit that food at the jail is inadequate and inmates are denied medical treatment. I've been conducting my own investigation into the charges as well. Anthony Neal's grandmother says she had to pay to have her grandson taken to the doctor.
Who had to pay the bill?
I had to pay the bill. They asked me would I pay the bill.
Who asked you if you paid the bill?
One of the deputy ladies, I don't know her name, but she asked me would I pay the bill.
Mrs. Mary Renfro, mother of inmate Melvin Renfro, has a different story.
The linen is very filthy, very dirty.
Former Deputy Sheriff Albert Johnson worked as a deputy in Macon County for over 10 years.
Are the prisoners in the Macon County Jail being fed?
No, but they're not. They're not being fed properly. Sometimes don't have any food at all.
No food at all?
Right. And sometimes have a little grits, something like that. Well, the sheriff do buy a little food, it don't last long. He don't care who is laugh or don't laugh, he gone.
How do you know he doesn't care?
Well, he don't do anything about it. He know they didn't get any food.
Sheriff Amerson denies the accusation.
Never denied anybody any medical attention. I think that we have records that show and substantiate the fact that we have ordered food from various places, the same place the restaurants get them from, get it from. City Provision, the same place where you get meat from everywhere else, and we have records that show where we spent anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a month for food.
This is what Neal and Renfro say inmates were served for lunch on February 16th. They say this hard-boiled egg was their entire lunch for that day. Sheriff Amerson was not available for comment on the boiled egg lunch late this afternoon.
When this case, the one filed today, will reach the judge is not known at this time. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the federal court.
All of the speakers agreed that black-on-black crime is a serious problem. Many offered reasons for the increasing crime rate, like the large number of people who are unemployed, the deterioration of the family and community programs, and a breaking away from the church and morality. Others felt the problem should be looked at as a universal problem rather than exclusively black. Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle challenged the participants to become part of the solution by getting personally involved.
We'll set you up a crime prevention program in your neighborhood, and with our help maybe, and your help, we'll resolve some of this. And I pledge to you 391 sworn police officers support in doing it, and I'm just as close as your telephone day or night.
City Councilman Mark Gilmore, who sponsored tonight's forum, says he plans to schedule another in the near future. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
He was by last week. He didn't play. I believe he didn't play in San Diego, and then I don't believe he played in Hawaii. He came by, and he spent a little time there, and like he told me, he said, Coach, he said, I don't know what I got to do. I played in 3 tournaments. I'm 47 under par, and I can't win. He said, I'm not discouraged. He said, everybody's asking me why I can't win. He said, I don't feel that way at all. I just feel like that for 3 tournaments I've just been snake bit, because he said Liskey, he said that he couldn't believe that he was 23 under par, and he was fighting to even come close to him. And he said the next tournament he was more under, as he made 8 or 10 under on the next tournament, and he said, don't worry, he said, I'm going to win a tournament. I've made my mind up, and he said, I've never played any better in my life.
Leviticus Project members say everyone is indirectly affected by crimes in the coal industry, since fraud in this area results in higher utility rates for consumers. Those crimes include murder, theft of heavy coal mining equipment, and complex organized frauds against financial institutions and investors. Thomas Krebs of the Alabama Securities Commission explains how these schemes are worked in several states.
For example, we will see a New York general partner with a limited partnership having investment property in Alabama, which is sold to investors in Indiana by securities dealers or by firms located in Georgia. So Alabama is both the site from which the frauds emanate, and also we're tied to the project by virtue of the fact that the property in Alabama is alleged to is used in connection with the fraud.
Project members plan not only to identify those who've committed these crimes, but also make recommendations to each state's legislature and to Congress in Washington on some problems and possible solutions. So far, 21 defendants have been charged with coal-related crimes in the 7-state area. Project members hope more indictments and convictions will come soon. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
When I said that there's something, and boards of trustees, and we want to know why. If they can prove to us and show to us that Mayor Farmer and Mr. Dixon and Bishop Barron have no personal motives in their nomination, and their support of the nomination, then we will be open-minded enough to support Brother Herman Harris. We have some serious problems concerning...
Police say the young woman's nude body was discovered by a caretaker for the private property located on a dirt road off Wadsden Road near U.S. Highway 31 South in Hope Hall. Authorities say the victim, believed to be about 17 years old, was strangled. Police say a green strap was involved in the strangulation. Officials say the victim's clothes were scattered about near a barn. No motive has been determined, although police say they're still working on several leads. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The National Governors Association annual winter meeting here in Washington had all the earmarks of a real battle royal, as these governors were faced with the dual problem of having several costly programs, such as Medicaid and transportation, turned back to the states, while at the same time facing cutbacks in those very same programs. Well, when the governors had a chance to sit down with Reagan and talk it over, more than a few minds were won over. Alabama's Bob James, a Democrat, came out of that meeting totally committed to Reagan's economic package.
I think the direction is 100% right. I think they're asking people to put the national interest ahead of local interest, to realize that the American economy must be revitalized and that the American dollar must be stabilized, or inflation is going to wreck the whole ship. Now, I think they will go to great extremes to see that the truly needy, the sick, the elderly are protected, that Social Security, as an example, is strengthened. But I see great determination here to find those programs, and they are there by the thousands, that are rip-offs, that are abused, that don't make for the work ethic, and either curtail them drastically or eliminate them, and I support that 100%.
It remains to be seen just how long this honeymoon between Governor James and the new administration continues. During his stay here in Washington, James will meet with Education Department officials about the government suit against Alabama over desegregation of the state's university system. If the state and the federal government can find no common ground in those pending negotiations, James may find himself locked in further dialogue with the administration, and it might not be pleasant. Bruce Finland, WSFA TV News, Washington.
But to each of you, a key to the city. This key is symbolic of the fact that we want to recognize each of you, recognize you for these accomplishments. Championship teams are not made overnight. Championship teams are Joe Eason, where's the team. Questions that you would have, I don't ask you to respond to them now, but as you look into them, if you will, during that fiscal year and all the departments, this test is going on. We'll call very shortly for authority to engage CPAs for this ongoing year.
James said he was pleased with the comments from the new education secretary, and he put the emphasis on the word new. By March 9th, Terrence Bell wants to see another report on the three universities.
A report that updates a lot of the statistical data that underlies the entire reason for the discussions to start off with.
James says the information on which the Carter administration based its decision is 2 years old. The governor said he and Bell did not discuss any packages for changing the way the three universities are organized.
We discussed a number of alternate routes, the moving of duplicated programs from one to the other, the avenue of a total merger, recognizing that timing in all of this is quite important, recognizing that the economic factors, and it's certainly the one thing we wish to achieve is the quality aspects, and posing the question, the real question, is that what is good for the student?
He says his alternatives were well received. Once that report is turned in, there'll be more meetings, and the state and federal government will have to agree on a plan and a timetable for changes. But James seems pleased that he and the new administration agree on one basic point, that primary responsibility for local education lies at the local level. Don Brownlee for WSFA TV News, Washington.
For the commission was changed in 1979 by the passage of an act called Act 79-461. That act modestly increased the strength of the commission for personal interviews and an ultimate selection. Dr. Porter has pledged his support toward making the transition as orderly. I have decided, therefore, to remove myself from the center of the controversy to ensure that a more rational process might prevail, free of previous differences of opinions and hostilities.
It's in your share of net long-term gains or loss of partnerships and fiduciaries.
He's working out on it, just to see how it does. Sure.
The total cost of a market basket of 20 common items jumped 2.1% this month to $26.97 compared to $26.41 in January. The Farm Bureau conducts a food price survey every month, and survey coordinator Dick Fifield says an average of increases in the first 2 months of 1981 projects to an annual rate of 17.2%. That means the same bag of groceries could cost up to $32 a year from now if the projection rate holds up. Peanut butter went up 22.8% from last month, produce 13.8%. Fifield says he expects produce prices to relax as new plantings come into the marketplace, but he says peanuts will remain in short supply. Meat prices, however, are low. Fifield says a depression in farm prices for hogs, cattle, and poultry have produced excellent buys for most meat items this month. The only price increase reported was ground beef, which rose 1.8%. Fifield predicts consumers can continue to find good buys in red meats, eggs, and poultry, at least until spring. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
We maintain a golf course to a point that for a tournament we really don't have to do too much extra. The biggest thing we'll do is double cut the greens each day of the tournament, and we'll have special pin placements that the tour representatives set up.
They want to play at the course at about 6,000 yards, so that will mean that we can tee them mostly off of the front of the white tees, front of the regular men's tees. And on several of the long par 4 holes, we'll let them tee off from the ladies' tees. But I think they want to play it at about 6,000 or maybe 6,100 yards.
How about pin placement? Will that be up to you or the WPGT?
It'll be up to them. We'll work with them and give them some input on it, but basically I think it's just one of their requirements. They set the pins all 3 days.
Kemp told Alabama engineers his department and the highway industry are facing near critical times with revenue dropping and inflation rising.
Of course, we have a little thing called bonded indebtedness in Alabama that's hung on our back, and it's going up too. So we really caught in a bind.
Kemp says President Reagan's proposed budget cuts will have some effect on the highway industry, but he favors those cutbacks, saying there's been too much federal regulation. Kemp says in order to counter reduced federal and state spending, emphasis on the value of money must be placed where it can best be used. Kemp says his department is working toward that end. Kemp cited several areas where his department has made noticeable progress, such as the 4-cent gasoline tax passed last year. Kemp called the tax a major project, although he says counties fared better than the highway department. The counties received 55% of the gas tax revenue. Kemp says the future of the highway industry will see more work in completing interstates throughout the country and continuing improvements to the state's highways, roads, and bridges. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The passage of the death penalty bill appeared a certainty from the onset, but there was more than 2 hours of debate. The only opposition to the bill came from the black members of the House, but their argument ranged from Birmingham Representative Tony Harrison's position that all life is sacred to charges that the bill is a kickoff to Attorney General Charles Graddick's 1982 election campaign. But the most emotional arguments were based on the black members' belief that the death penalty is not applied equally to both blacks and whites.
Show me how it would be administered fairly among black and white and rich and poor, then I would be for the death penalty. But until that day comes, then I will be against the death penalty in this state.
It is a problem in every community,
and people, both black and white, need relief, and I think they support the bill.
Even though each member who spoke in opposition recognized that they were outnumbered 8-1, there were more than a dozen attempts to amend or alter the bills or to adjourn the House. Each failed. The final vote at 10 minutes after 5, 87-14. The Senate, meanwhile, stopped an effort to bring the death penalty bill up for debate in the upper chamber today. Senate Rules Committee Chairman Albert McDonald says it will probably be a couple of weeks before the death penalty bill is debated in the Senate. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The practice of prostitution in Alabama. According to the findings that we've been able to come up with, it's against the law. Action program.
Program involving the use of alcohol. That's your business.
Charles Diggs, heading for a halfway house for felons in the Washington, D.C. area, says he has no comment at present concerning his stay at Maxwell's federal prison camp. Convicted in 1978 of mail fraud and of diverting $60,000 in staff salaries to pay his personal expenses, Diggs says he expects to sort out his future plans soon. He indicated it could involve politics.
Well, it's an option. I've had many people who have written me from my district and from around the country expressing their hopes that I will maintain my interest in politics, take advantage of my experience to do what I can for the kind of people that I've represented in the past.
Diggs, once the nation's senior black congressman, joined 20 other men at the halfway house in the Mount Pleasant subdivision of Washington. Authorities say he will be assigned to household chores and could be paroled in 3 months. They say he may find work in the Washington area, but cannot leave the city. Diggs is no stranger to Alabama, having served in the Army Air Corps during World War II at Tuskegee's Moulton Field. And in 1979, he came to Birmingham to attend an Alabama black homecoming. Reporting from Danley Field, George Mitchell, WSFA TV News. Charles Diggs is heading for a halfway house for felons in the Washington, D.C. area. He says at present he has no comment about his stay at Maxwell's federal prison camp, but he indicates his future could be in the political realm.
Well, it's an option. I've had many people who have written me from my district and from around the country expressing their hopes that I will maintain my interest in politics, take advantage of my experience to do what I can for the kind of people that I've represented in the past.
What are your plans for the immediate future?
I haven't sorted all those things out. I have many options, and I expect to sort them out in the next few years.
Diggs, once the nation's senior black congressman, was convicted in 1978 of mail fraud and of diverting $60,000 in staff salaries to pay his personal expenses. He resigned during his 13th House term after the Supreme Court refused to review his conviction. Diggs is no stranger to Alabama, having served in the Army Air Corps during World War II at Tuskegee's Moulton Field. And in 1979, he came to Birmingham to attend an Alabama black homecoming. Reporting from Danley Field, George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Senator White says the legislature needs to send a message to juvenile offenders who think they can get away with anything because the juvenile justice system treats them with kid gloves. But at a public hearing, Montgomery Circuit Judge Randall Thomas told legislators the bill is too drastic. He says the law would compromise those 85 to 90% of 16 and 17-year-olds who belong in juvenile court for the sake of the 10 or 15% who belong in adult court. Thomas says the present law simply needs to be tightened. Among his suggestions, use the present system that allows judges to certify a juvenile as an adult. Then, once he's certified as an adult for one crime, treat him as an adult for all his crimes. Also, require that for certain crimes, such as rape and murder, a youngster automatically be treated as an adult. And Thomas suggests that repeat juvenile offenders be transferred to adult court. Nearly everyone who testified after Thomas agreed with his proposals, and so did Senator White. So the committee voted to wait for Thomas's written recommendations before voting on the bill. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The biennial budgeting bill would require the state during odd-numbered years to adopt the budgets for the next 2 years. Representative Eric Cates of Greenville, who sponsors the bill, said this would leave even-numbered years for the legislature to deal with other important legislation. But House Ways and Means Committee members Dial of Lineville, Pegues of Marion, and Sasser of Ozark said they had reservations about this proposal in light of the unpredictable economy. But State Budget Officer Jimmy Rayford said there would have to be provisions for the legislature to realign their budgets during those even-numbered years. Rayford also said biennial budgeting would save time and money. Alabama abandoned biennial budgeting in 1975, and if this bill gets full legislative approval, it would go to the voters in November, and if ratified, would go into effect in 1982. The Ways and Means Committee also gave favorable report to a bill that would clarify a law on homestead exemptions, ensuring that those landowners under the age of 65 would pay ad valorem taxes, while those over 65 with a gross income of less than $12,000 would be exempt. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
PSC President Billy Joe Camp says he's determined to reach a compromise with Alabama Power Company to bring relief to utility customers through a lower rate settlement. The settlement actually involves two cases, one going back to 1978 when the power company asked for a $288 million rate increase. Later, $208 million was approved by the PSC. Then the power company went to the Supreme Court asking for the full amount, but the case was sent back to the Commission. In 1979, the power company asked for a $122 million rate hike. The PSC granted $30.6 million. The power company also took that case to the Supreme Court, and following a court order, they're now collecting that amount until a settlement can be made. During the second rate case, the power company and other parties came close to a compromise of $73.4 million, but the settlement fell through. Alabama power officials say the $73.4 million is now comparable to $92.5 million, but the Attorney General's office says the $73.4 million is still a fair amount. The power company says that amount won't let them collect a 13% rate of return allowed by a court decision. Attorney General Charles Graddick asked for an extension to consider allowing the power company an $80 million rate hike, but Alabama Power says they'll only go as low as $95 million. PSC President Billy Joe Camp suggested a compromise of $88 million. The Commission will reconvene tomorrow morning to further discuss the rate settlement. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Alabama coach Wimp Sanderson attributed the Tide's loss to poor rebounding in the first half. Auburn was able to get 2, 3, and sometimes 4 shots at the basket in the first 20 minutes, and the Tigers led by as many as 6 points. Alabama cut Auburn's lead to 1 by halftime, but Sanderson said his team should have been up by 3 or 4 had it not been for the Tigers' ability to get the offensive rebound. Auburn shot 53% from the field tonight. The Tigers hit 13 of 23, or 56% in the all-important second half, when Auburn overcame a 3-point deficit at one point. On the other hand, Alabama shot poorly just about all night, 37% from the field for the game. Eddie Phillips was high man for the Tide with 17. Ken Johnson added 13. Johnson and Tide guard Eddie Adams were playing before some of the hometown folks who made the short trip from Phoenix City tonight. Darrell Lockhart led Auburn with 16, 8 in each half. The big man demonstrates here how Auburn was able to get inside against Alabama tonight. Frame Poindexter added 10, including 6 big points in the first half, coming from outside. The Tigers mixed it up well. The 56-54 win ends an 11-game losing streak to Alabama. The last time Auburn won was in 1975. The win lifted Auburn to 11-14 overall, 4-13 in the SEC. Alabama falls to 9-8 in the conference, 16-9 overall. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Say, as opposed to paper savings when instead of was how to pay the organization. Now here's the director of the Social Security Agency saying their leave was for sickness or for, I found to be a very professional group, was we'll pay you a dime unless it comes out of actual savings. Well, after a number of hours of negotiation, they agreed to that too. Now, the bottom line of where that put us was,
I really don't want to get into a controversy in the news media about the AD job, because the people that are running the university and making those decisions are certainly qualified, and I've expressed my interest in the job, and I'm going to let it go at that. We've got some exciting things coming up. One, of course, our spring practice is going to start on April the 13th, and we'll have a coaching clinic on the 20th. I don't think you got to be a Joe Cribbs or James Brooks, for instance, to be a great wishbone back. So the other things, it helps, but I think it's done, over the years, they haven't had that many great running backs, but they've got a lot of
platform that they failed to act on these proposals that's going to be hammered home if it don't pass in this session. Next session, sure enough. This campaign is just starting. All this so-called conventional wisdom I've been hearing about, nothing done in the last session, we got some issues that folks going to have to run on. So I say thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
I have ever seen. And I'm glad you're here, and I like what you say and think, and I don't know how all of these rumors.
Demonstration after your trip to Washington.
Bessie, I wanted to talk to you about that. You've made some statements that are probably right in your question, but you'll see a lot of versions of various budgets. But the legislature is just fantastic, and I think you're going to see a lot.
The new direction the country is taking will have one on Montgomery.
I said, absolutely not. We are not going to protest. We may not like
Bring us some out here to cook. The Air Force System Command statement on defense industrial base issues, for as long as you want them to be.
there are a lot of CETA employees in worthwhile jobs around the city. But I think the program is going to be phased out or nearly phased out. City of Montgomery itself only has less than 20 CETA employees. Over the period of the last few years that I have been mayor,
W. Lewis, principal of Daisy Lawrence School and past president of ASU, its students, faculty, and staff. 3, Mr. Harris is a strong Mr. Harris is not influenced by a small but very vocal group of politicians and individuals who seem to have vested personal interest in ASU. It is this group which has led the opposition to Mr. Harris's appointment by vicious and unfounded personal attacks on his character, and which has launched a statewide and nationwide campaign of false propaganda designed to achieve his defeat, including vote swapping in the state legislature.
Primarily on the different operating expense adjustments which the Attorney General made, and also on the fact that they felt that the settlement further adjustment to that is $34,000. Primarily that number is composed of in number that the staff is recommending is composed of. I will emphasize it will be a brief summary. That request was subsequently adjusted downward, excuse me, and should be adjusted accordingly. The other main adjustment concerns productivity relative to the general made, and also on the fact that they felt that the settlement, the most recent return should be
Seagulls don't finish. I believe Mr. Always hot shell. You wouldn't have to work. Has been properly aerated. It sure is. Aerated and planted. Give us all the time. I think we don't pass out. Have the right number. So I'm trying to call me. Yeah, let's get going out now.
The resolution reads as follows, whereas the revenues pledged to education would be a great and that money is available to support education. I'm sorry, I just didn't know they were, This is the cause and effect relationship. The program.
Judicial edict. I think it was big sheer madness to put all the money.
Yeah, economist at Auburn that we had roughly.
Taste around. With Larry Hildreth, it was Coach Jordan's nephew, and he was carrying the milk to town, and that's how I got to school every day.
That it was the best one of all. And because football is the only some of the members don't handle the ball.
The rest of your life. And I said, in this glass right here is 100% pure water.
He doesn't look like he's 17 years old.
Oh, pictures. Yes. Sir, could you get your hands out of your pocket, please?
Most people have never seen a tornado, yet these violent storms took the lives of 121 Alabamians in the decade of the 70s. Most of those deaths occurred during back-to-back outbreaks in 1973 and 74. Last year, tornadoes in Alabama injured 26 people but killed none. In fact, our state has escaped tornado deaths for the past 3 years, and many of those who've lived through a tornado disaster will tell you that they're alive today because they knew what to do when the emergency came. In an effort to make sure everyone does know what to do during a tornado emergency, Severe Weather Preparedness Week will include a statewide tornado drill. The drill, scheduled for next Thursday, will provide an opportunity to test the state's various warning systems, as well as to give people across the state a chance to discover if they can get a warning quickly and act quickly and wisely. Tuesday will explain the procedures to be followed during the upcoming drill. I'm Dan Atkinson with Weather Beat.
Alabama Power Company today went from asking for a $98 million settlement to saying it'll consider an $88 million figure. PSC President Billy Joe Camp suggested that amount, which is between the $73.4 million settlement almost agreed to last year and the $98 million figure the power company says will produce its court-allowed minimum rate of return. Alabama Power says it would accept a retroactive $92 million rate hike for the past 7 months, which would give utility customers a total refund of around $17 million. Attorney General Charles Graddick still firmly contends the $73.4 million settlement nearly reached last year will get the job done this year and give consumers lower rates. PSC President Camp says he's determined to settle what he calls 2 monstrous rate cases, and Camp says he's trying to reach the Attorney General, who's out of town, for a one-on-one meeting about the settlement. Camp has sent a tentative commission meeting for tomorrow morning. Jane Matheson, WSFA, TV News.
Here is used for arts and crafts. They have a table here where they do their painting on the mold and pouring around. We've got the best furniture over there. We're redoing and recovering to get, we've all got to. This is the doctor's office next door, and these are drawing rooms, so people down here, we don't take the nursing room.
Bronner says he agrees with the governor that benefits for state employees and teachers are too high, but he says the legislature should leave the system alone. Bronner says if the benefits are frozen where they are now, inflation will catch up with them and they'll eventually level off. Bronner says tampering with existing employees' benefits would be wrong. He says those employees gave up salary increases during the 60s and 70s in exchange for higher benefits. He says this system would work because new employees would come onto the job knowing what their retirement would be ahead of time. He says the one thing the legislature should not do is continue to increase the benefits. On the subject of the new housing program, Bronner says the retirement system will put $20 million into savings and loans in banks in the state so they in turn can offer mortgage loans to consumers. Bronner says by pumping this money into the banks, more people will be able to buy homes and the retirement systems and lending institutions will both make profits. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Representative George Clark of Utah sponsored the most significant bill to pass out of the House today, the Deceptive Trades Act, known as the Consumer Protection Bill. The bill won overwhelming approval, 93-2, after Clark pointed out that Alabama is the only state without such a bill. But there were a number of amendments added, including one by Coffee County's Jimmy Hawley that would prevent excessive charges by hospitals. But Demopolis's Rick Manley lost an effort to amend the implementation date until next year. He contends there could be legal problems not yet uncovered. Earlier, Representative Hawley killed a bill that would give counties and cities home rule on the sale of alcohol. There was a quick series of parliamentary maneuvers that indefinitely postponed action on the bill and then eliminated any possibility of reconsidering the vote. Hawley says the bill would only have proliferated the sale of alcohol. The action of the House was interrupted for a brief time shortly after noon when there was a report of a fire.
Some smoke in the building. They have the fire department here. They do not know where the smoke is originating, and they've asked that the building be evacuated temporarily.
House members and other Capitol employees calmly evacuated, but the Senate never quit working. Firemen found nothing and assumed the smoky odor came from workers sanding marble on the outside of the Capitol. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Coker is a 2-time winner of the Alabama Girls High School Championship. After a year on scholarship at the University of Kentucky and Troy State, she turned professional last August. Since that time, Coker has played on the Women's Professional Golf Tour, attended the LPGA qualifying school, and modeled for a golf calendar to be marketed by a Japanese firm. She was also instrumental in bringing the Women's Tour to Montgomery.
It's a great facility. I love the golf course, and I just thought it'd be a good opportunity for the girls to come and get some of this good Southern hospitality.
How do you feel about playing before the hometown folks? Any pressure?
Oh, sure. There's a little pressure, but I think you learn to handle pressure out here playing pro golf. If you can't handle it, then you don't stay out here very long.
What about the future for Vicki Coker? You've played in an LPGA tournament as an amateur. Is that possibly on down the road?
Oh, yeah, that's been my long-term goal. The girls out here on this tour, the WPGT, I'd say most of us, that is our main goal, is to play LPGA, and this is a good training ground for us. We get a lot of good competition from week to week, and we get to learn whether or not we can play with these girls. And if you can make money out here on this tour, you can definitely make money out on the LPGA.
Vicky's foursome today included Sue Koffenberg, another WPGT pro, Lagoon Park Green Superintendent Ken Mangum, and course professional Nick Geddes, who rolled in this one on number 4. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
Got you, buddy.
He's the old hawk coming home to roost. Barry had assisted me as a coach one year, and then played terrific basketball for me for 2 years, and I hope he's done Charlie Rugg the same job he did for me, and I know he has. Charlie told me that he's contributed greatly, not only as a basketball player, but as a student at Belhaven, and we're real proud of Barry.
Back. You got to remember that at the end of that bunch of years, it extends the time. Basically, back in that 1 year and make a determination on it. Qualified because some employer has given them the wrong. I've got to admit to the error in getting up. We had originally not pay and pay them all.
In terms of letting people let you off pay you out.
That we shouldn't have paid.
I understand that, but the next.
Senate Bill 262 amend Section 1 of Senate Bill employers benefit wages for the purpose of the experience rating provision.
Let me ask this. Do you pay a lump sum payment even if the person has started working and found out that?
School Superintendent Henry Adair says the child nutrition program is targeted to undergo a $1.5 billion decrease in funds in 1982. As a result, he says the county will lose 18 cents for each lunch served, including those that are free or sold at reduced prices. Adair says almost 60% of the lunches in the county are in the free or reduced price category, and says there's no way for the county to make up for the decrease in funds except to raise lunch prices by 35 to 40 cents. Another area which may face drastic funding cuts is the Impact Aid program, which gives federal money to local schools in place of taxes on government property. Montgomery County gets $1.4 million a year under this program for children whose parents are in the military. But Associate Superintendent Thomas Bobo says Impact Aid may also be cut, even though it hasn't as yet been placed in the federal budget. The board voted to draft a resolution explaining how these cuts will affect Montgomery County, with copies to be sent to Governor James and members of the legislature. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Senator Dewey White has been holding up passage of the bond issue in the Senate. He says he's worried that the $90 million bond issue will cost more than $300 million if paid back over a 30-year period. He says he's afraid federal Medicaid money may not be available to pay off the issue. White offered 7 amendments, some dealing with accountability for expenditure of the funds, and each amendment was tabled. Then White said he had enough amendments to keep the Senate debating until midnight if necessary, but his gut feeling is that the Mental Health Department needs only about half of the $90 million. One of the bill's supporters, Ryan DeGraffenreid, pointed out that the bills only set up an authority to sell up to $90 million, that there's no requirement all bonds be sold. And despite accusations that he's trying to make the bonds unsellable, White continued offering amendments. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. Senator Dewey White says the legislature needs some more answers before authorizing the sale of $90 million worth of bonds. He says the Mental Health Department still hasn't accounted for the money used from previous bond issues, and he wants to know why the department owns 21,000 acres of land that could be sold and earning property taxes. He also worries that federal Medicaid funds won't be available to help pay off the bond issue. So White kept the Senate tied up for hours as he offered one amendment after another and as the Senate tabled each one. Proponents of the bill say White is delaying facing the issue and that his amendments are calculated to make the bonds harder to sell. Finally, by a vote of 15 to 14, senators decided to carry the issue over until they meet again next Wednesday. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.